Don't forget, you can reach the latest episode of Potomac Watch anytime. Just ask your smart speaker, play the Opinion Potomac Watch podcast.
From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Welcome back. What's notable about the drip, drip, drip nature of the finding of these documents is that it seems to be causing even some Democrats to break with the president. And let's listen to a clip of Senator Dick Durbin on CNN saying any classified information found in a former office holder's possession where it shouldn't have been diminishes that person.
Let's be honest about it. When that information is found, it diminishes the stature of any person who is in possession of it, because it's not supposed to happen. Whether it was the fault of a staffer or an attorney, it makes no difference. The elected official bears ultimate responsibility.
Colin, what do you make of the Democrats breaking on this issue? And do you suppose this is going to be added to the list of things by progressives or even moderates who think that Joe Biden is maybe not the best standard bearer for the Democratic Party in 2024?
Well, I think the Democrats have to come out now and say these things because they are looking at the same polls that the Republicans can see too, which is that, about 34% of Americans have said that they think that Biden handled the classified documents appropriately after he left office. So that's about 64% who say he handled them inappropriately. Those are big numbers, and it's good to see that people are taking these things seriously. I think it's the same reason why you see now the White House and the administration in general really trying to emphasize this theme that they're consensually handing over these documents. I think they said the word consensual about 15 times. I read it so many different places. And they're really trying to say, look, this is what makes us different from Trump. Everything's okay because we invited them in and we're all okay with them looking through all of our boxes and all of our closets and searching the home for 13 hours. And we're great with that. So don't worry about it. There's nothing to see here. But I think from a political standpoint, I don't know whether it really significantly impacts the way that Democrats see President Biden in general, because I think they're still writing this off to, oh, well, that's Uncle Joe. He's kind of forgetful. He didn't mean to. And with any political scandal, it doesn't matter whether it's this or another one, but things tend to catch on when they confirm people's previously existing impressions. So everyone wants to say that President Trump took these because he had a nefarious purpose, and President Biden had the documents for a totally different reason because he's sort of forgetful and didn't really mean to. So I'm not sure that it's going to actually change the way that the presidential prospects line up. I do think that one last thing is that I think we do have to pause here and assess what we're actually most concerned about from the core breach in national security. We can acknowledge that on a pure level, the classified documents just aren't supposed to be handled casually, or taken places or left lying around or shoved in boxes in your garage. That pure issue is a big deal for sure. But I do think we also need to get into the weeds and say, what are we afraid of regarding the casual handling of these classified documents? Are we concerned that they're going to be used for leverage against foreign governments, some personal dealings? Are we concerned that they'll be leaked to reporters for some political advantage in an upcoming election? So I think those questions need to be asked soon, too.
Kim, what's your view of this political question? There's already been the beginnings of a whisper campaign that maybe President Biden is too old to run for re-election, though all indications are that he intends to do so. But does this burgeoning classified document scandal become Exhibit A for that whisper campaign? And maybe part of the answer depends on if we ever get any information about what's actually in these documents. That's one of the frustrating things about these stories for the public and for journalists, I think, is they're classified documents. And so by their nature, we can't be told exactly what they are. Though, on the other hand, we've gotten some leaks about what was reportedly in what President Trump had, the documents he had at Mar-a-Lago. And I suppose, Kim, it's possible that in the next few months, we'll get some leaks about what President Biden had.
To the point about the whisper campaign, that could help explain why you might see some Democrats breaking. Democrats are going to be very loath to come out and make the argument in public or push too hard on the claim that Biden is too old, even though many of them think that, and many of them would like to see a new generation of leaders coming up now and getting their shot. But if there is a legitimate issue hanging out there, that there is a Department of Justice investigation ongoing, it becomes easier for Democrats to make the argument that this is simply too dangerous for Biden to wander back into a second election campaign with this hanging over his head. And that gets to timing. By the way, I would note that when Merrick Garland named the special counsel for Biden, he stressed at the end of his statement how much he'd like to see Robert Hur, the attorney, do this expeditiously with great haste, as it were, and get it done with. I'm sure everybody in the White House would like to see this, although there's a couple of problems there. One, historically, we have known that special counsels usually aren't in a hurry to get anything done. Bob Mueller was working on his probe into Trump for almost 2 years. Jack Smith, who was looking into Trump, has already been doing so now for a number of months. So how quickly can this get done? And then the added complication is it's going to strike some people as politically unfair if the Biden probe is wrapped up quickly and the Trump probe continues to drag on, given the potential to hurt a political campaign and Trump is an announced candidate. So that is all stuff that now has to be factored in by the Department of Justice, too.
Meantime, the White House is preparing for a changeover in the internal leadership. White House Chief of Staff Ron Klain is reportedly preparing to step down after the State of the Union address. And there are multiple news outlets now that are reporting that President Biden plans to name Jeffrey Zients as his replacement. Zients was the former coronavirus response coordinator. He's a former businessman, management consultant, reportedly a multimillionaire. Colin, not exactly the profile of what I would expect in a chief of staff for President Biden. And I wonder maybe the place to start is give us a sense of what the chief of staff's role is and how this might affect the White House over the next 2 years.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, looking at his profile, it doesn't look like he has a ton of political experience. He is more of a manager type. I'm not sure that's entirely disqualifying. I think if the chief of staff's office is just a room outside the Oval Office, but the role of the chief of staff is really to be a moat around the president. I mean, no one gets past without his clearance, and he has to be able to negotiate and prioritize on an extremely high level. So it's not just a matter of organizing meetings with foreign leaders or who goes first, but also it requires understanding the internal politics of the White House at a significant level of granularity. So you know when someone's requesting a meeting with the president that they're trying to bend his ear on a subject that they may have a disagreement on with another member of the administration or a member of the president's cabinet. So the chief of staff really has to be on top of all of that. So it does require both the management skills, the political skills, and a level of finesse there. I'm not sure whether or not he demonstrated that during his time working on the COVID response or not.
Kim, do you think this choice portends anything about what Biden intends to do over the next 2 years? I mean, it is being attacked already by progressives. Here's one anonymous strategist. Quote, Zients as a businessman embodies much of the corporate misconduct the executive branch led by a Democratic Party ought to be cracking down on, unquote. Kim, what do you make of those attacks by progressives on this White House chief of staff pick?
Progressives have never liked Zients because of his time as a management consultant, making a great deal of money in the corporate world before he took on some of these political jobs. So I think it's something that the White House has known, that he's not popular with that group. There have been some that have decided they're going to give him the benefit of the doubt. The White House seems to have just factored all of this in. I actually think it's an interesting pick because it would argue to me the sort of pick that you would want in office, indeed, if Biden was going to do a second run. And here's why. Just because, as Colin mentioned, Zients doesn't have a great deal of political acumen. He's really an organizational guy. And that is what you would want in that position if you were going to try to free up some of the rest of your central staff there to work on a reelection campaign, as it were. You'd want someone that you knew you could keep the trains running and make sure that everything was organizationally and logistically good so that everyone else had a little bit more brain capacity to help the president on his reelection effort. That, to me, actually does signal that perhaps Biden is very serious about a second run.
Well, to contradict the argument that I made a minute ago, I mean, the other thing to keep in mind is President Biden's lesson from the 2022 midterm elections. And at his post-election press conference, he was asked what he might change going forward, and he said, nothing. I'm not going to change anything in any fundamental way, unquote. And so, Colin, if President Biden is still the guy in charge and he's pushing the agenda that he's pushed in the next 2 years, maybe progressives are wrong about Zients and he will prove to be a better manager than Klain was and more effective as a result.
That may be true. I actually found it sort of funny that the progressives got as cross as they did about this and complained that because he'd been, highfalutin in the business community, that therefore he wasn't going to have their interests at heart. It is a fundamental misunderstanding of what the chief of staff does. I mean, he's not a lawmaker. He's not making policy. He's a manager. He's trying to keep all of the ships running on time. And to Kim's point, to the extent that he's able to do that to free up some bandwidth for some of the more political types, I think that that's where he's going to add the most value here.
Thank you, Colin and Kim. Thank you all for listening. You can email us at pwpodcast@wsj.com. If you like the show, please hit that subscribe button, and we'll be back tomorrow with another edition of Potomac Watch.